Welcome to this explainer. Right now, we're seeing a massive resurgence of state-led industrial policy, completely reshaping the globe, largely triggered by China challenging the technological hegemony of the West. But this aggressive strategy has sparked a pretty intense global debate, one that literally affects the future of global markets, international trade, and ultimately, your own wallet. So we're going to break down the historical parallels using the exact data and insights driving this massive conversation. So here is the multi-trillion-dollar mystery we're trying to solve today. Is China's ultimate economic fate going to be a long-lasting, decades-deep stagnation exactly like the one Japan experienced? It's a question that has completely divided top economists, and finding the answer means uncovering a fascinating, largely hidden history of how governments actually manage their economies behind closed doors.
Section 1. Is China turning into Japan? To figure out China's future, we actually have to clear up a massive misconception about Japan's past.
Listen to this incredibly bold claim from Justin Yifu Lin. He's a Peking University professor and a former World Bank chief economist. In a recent interview, he essentially argued that Japan stagnated because they foolishly abandoned their industrial policy after the 1980s. He very confidently states that China is succeeding precisely because they refuse to make this alleged Japanese mistake. Now, this is a super popular narrative right now, but it definitely demands a closer look. Because when that claim hit the internet, prominent economic writer Noah Smith chimed in with a massive reality check. Did Japan actually stop innovating? Absolutely not. From the 1990s onward, Japan was actively developing 3G mobile technology, digital cameras, lithium-ion batteries, hybrid cars, high-performance ceramics, the list goes on. So the narrative that Japan just threw in the towel and gave up on industrial policy, it's demonstrably false.
Section 2. The truth of Japan's 80s strategy. Okay, so if Japan didn't abandon its industrial policy, what exactly were they doing?
For this, we're going to turn to the insights of Michael Pettis from the Carnegie Endowment. He points out something fascinating. Japan knew they had a severe structural problem, a devastating lack of domestic consumer demand. But rather than doing the incredibly hard work to fix that deep imbalance, they used a workaround. They pivoted hard to supply-side technology development. The logic here was that new technologies would boost worker productivity and international competitiveness, which would theoretically raise wages and eventually fix the demand issue. It was a staggering, high-stakes bet on the supply side, all just to mask a demand-side crisis. Let's look at the timeline. On the surface, back in 1985, the famous Miyakawa report publicly pushed Japan to strengthen its consumer market. Sounds great, right? Well, behind closed doors, classified CIA memos from April and September of 1986 revealed they were secretly doing the exact opposite. They weren't planning demand-side fixes at all. They were quietly pouring immense state support into emerging high-tech sectors to artificially boost their international competitiveness. It wasn't until much later, under Prime Minister Koizumi in the early 2000s, that full financial liberalization really took hold.
So, how did Japan actually pull off this hidden strategy? Well, they didn't just blindly throw money at everything. They made ruthless, calculated decisions to let go of dying, uncompetitive industries. Things like basic shipbuilding, textiles, and certain steel sectors. Then, they took those massive funds and redirected them straight into emerging high-tech. They evolved from a broad, heavy-handed industrial policy into a highly targeted, softer innovation policy. It was a complete structural pivot, done practically in the shadows. Section 3, China's new industrial policy. And this is where the historical parallels get truly fascinating. Remember how Justin Yifu Lin criticized Japan for abandoning its industrial policy? Well, here is the massive irony pointed out by Michael Pettis. According to his analysis, China is actually walking down the exact same flawed path that Japan took in the 80s and 90s. Instead of transitioning to consumption-driven growth, China is doubling down on supply-side industrial policies. They're basically frantically trying to engineer their way out of a demand problem simply by producing more and more technology. And honestly, the similarities don't stop there. Just like historical Japan, modern China is facing some incredibly severe structural headwinds. The efficiency of their investments is dropping dramatically. That means every single dollar pumped into the economy, especially in real estate, yields less and less actual growth. You couple that with a rapidly aging and shrinking population, and you've got a macroeconomic environment that perfectly mirrors the exact precipice Japan stood on right before its lost decades.
Section 4, Consumption and Investment in Data. But hey, you don't have to just take my word for it. The hard macroeconomic numbers are the ultimate clue here.
When we look at household consumption as a percentage of GDP, this is based on World Bank data, the demand problem becomes painfully obvious. In the US, household consumption drives over 80% of the economy. Even in Japan today, it's over 75%. But in China, it's sitting at a dangerously low 55%. The domestic population simply isn't consuming enough to absorb what the country is actually producing.
Now, contrast that consumption data with the investment rate as a percentage of GDP. While the US and Japan hover around a pretty healthy 20 to 25%, China's investment rate is astonishingly high, well over 40%. This is an extreme macroeconomic imbalance. China is aggressively investing massive amounts of capital into production and infrastructure, but their citizens just aren't spending enough to support it. Section 5, the real estate shift. So, you might be wondering, where exactly is all this investment money going if it isn't going to consumers? Well, for years, the answer was real estate. According to data from Kobe University professor Kajitani Kai, Chinese bank loans directed at the real estate sector hit a mind-boggling peak of nearly 6 trillion yuan in 2019 alone. To put that into perspective, that's roughly $830 billion. But then, as the property market crisis hit and prices started falling, the Chinese government forced a massive structural pivot. And watch how unbelievably fast this shifted. By 2024, the state had aggressively redirected those funds away from real estate, pouring an explosive 8 trillion yuan directly into green technologies and industry, with another 4 trillion going to general industry. This is a monumental, state-controlled transfer of wealth, all aimed at creating what the Chinese government now officially calls new productive forces. Unsurprisingly, this massive flood of supply-side investment is creating some intense geopolitical friction, and there are two very different views here. From the U.S. perspective, as articulated by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, China has a structural overcapacity problem. Basically, they're producing way more than the global market can absorb, which threatens industries abroad. But from the Chinese perspective, they argue this is simply about innovation. They claim the U.S. just can't stomach the legitimate rising competitiveness of Chinese companies. While we aren't picking sides here, it is absolutely vital to understand how these opposing frameworks view the exact same economic data. Section 6. The way to escape stagnation. Ultimately, the math has to balance. If China wants to avoid Japan's fate, economists generally agree that some major shifts need to happen. Here's the straightforward two-step roadmap suggested by analysts to fix this massive imbalance. Step 1. China fundamentally has to increase domestic demand. The most effective way to do this for an aging population is to dramatically improve social security and social rights. You have to raise the quality of life so citizens actually feel secure enough to spend their savings instead of hoarding them for emergencies. Step 2. All these massive supply-side investments in things like EVs and digital tech must ultimately translate into real consumer demand. They can't just sit in warehouses as excess inventory. Now, the Chinese government officially states in its reports that it wants to transition to a consumption-based model. But, as this explainer has shown, their aggressive investments are still heavily skewed toward the supply side, perfect mirroring Japan's incredibly risky 1980s playbook. So the ultimate question we have to leave you with today is this. Will China's actual future reality match its official reports, or will Xi Jinping's actions tell a very different story? Keep a close eye on where the money flows next. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and as always, keep questioning the data.